Welcome to the Recruitment Hackers Podcast, a show about innovations, technology, and leaders in the recruitment industry. Brought to you by TalkPush, the leading recruitment automation platform.
Hello, and welcome back to the Recruitment Hackers Podcast. Today, I have a very special guest on the show. I normally talk to people from the practitioner side, but today I have the awkward pleasure of talking to what may be perceived by others as a peer or a competitor in the chief of staff for Wade and Wendy. Wade and Wendy is one of the early companies that got into the conversational AI for recruitment space. And I first heard about this company, I think 5 years ago at the very beginning. Dave Mekelburg is the chief of staff and joining us today for a chat, which will be a little different and a little bit more about, I suppose, about chatbots, right, Dave? If that's okay with you. Welcome to the show.
Great to be here. Always excited to talk about chatbots. I don't get to do it enough, especially in this context. So, and I will say, I cheat a little bit. So I'm our chief of staff. I'm also our head of people. So I am technically a practitioner. I do oversee our recruiting and hiring. So I can speak a little bit to that. So it won't be a total foreigner, but very excited to talk about chat and talk about, what's happening in recruitment automation and hacking.
Awesome. Were you the guy who came up with the job title conversational designer?
Ooh, that's a good question.
I picked that up from a blog post by your CEO, and I saw that conversational designer, and I fell in love with it so much that I immediately posted for that job myself at TalkPush, within a week, and I started collecting applications. We hire a bunch now, and it has taken off, and I almost thought maybe you guys coined the term.
Oh, I would love to take credit for that. Let me think where we first probably encountered it. So there was some early going like way back in time, like Pullstring, which was like a Pixar backed conversation design platform. We had met with their team and they had somebody that they called a conversation designer. I think Apple and Siri, I think a lot of the Siri team was starting to use that phrase. But, certainly when we posted that job, it got some eyes because people were like, conversation designer, I've never heard of that.
Yeah, we got the same thing. And I also, one of my head of conversational design, she said that when she changed her job title from product manager to conversational designer, the volume of interest she got on LinkedIn also shot up considerably. So it's not a good retention strategy, maybe a good hiring strategy. Conversational designer, great place, great way to advertise, but also not a great retention strategy because people will come out and try to hire them away from you. And so maybe if I'm lucky, I'll find out who came up with that term and I'll be on a goose chase. Dave, I'll start looking at the people at Siri or an Apple to see if I can find the person who coined that. But yeah, definitely chatbots have been around for longer than we've been around.
That's definitely true. But it's the rate of change, and I think you've probably seen this over the last few years. The rate of change has been astronomical, just in terms of the penetration, the familiarity from the average person that's interacting with the chatbot. When we first started, we were doing user testing and having people chat with the bot about work. Like, talk to me about what it is you want to do and what it is you like to do. And it was such a novel experience for people. And now, really up and down the, across the country in every corner, everyone has some experience with chatbot, whether it's, through a bank teller or through a customer service bot. The depth of penetration has gotten beyond, people that are interested in technology or people that are interacting with, the hot new fintech startup, things like that, and really gotten into the hands of the average person so that, when we started, we built so much into the experience to make sure that this was intuitive and didn't scare people that, might have some emotional anxiety about talking to a bot about AI and automation in their lives, and get them to put, trust in helping us get them the right opportunity. And we're in between them and, the right job. And that's a responsibility that we take really seriously. And we had to build an experience where people would trust and believe that we would guide them appropriately, given that it's a technology experience. And I do think over the last few years, that comfort, that familiarity, just looking at, when the feedback that we get and things like that, there's way less like, wow, I've never seen this before, to, what a high quality conversational experience. We get feedback about the conversation design. And that's just something that, I think a few years ago, your average, salesperson applying for an entry-level job wasn't leaving feedback about our bot's conversation design.
I got completely thrown off. You're putting me back to 2018 or 17. I was in India meeting with, I think it was Expedia, and I was presenting our technology, Chatbot for Recruitment. And this gentleman, this engineer that I met, started showering me with questions about natural language processing and how many intents do you have mapped out and what is your taxonomy around the intents. And I thought, where did I step into? I don't even know. I don't know half the words he's using. But I haven't had that experience too often. Still, most people, they're past the point of, I've never worked with a chatbot before. They still feel like it's a bit of a dirty word and that it may ruin the candidate experience. But obviously, if they're working with us, they're past that as well. But yeah, I guess it's a bit of marketing to change the perception and say, well, it's not, one move was to say it's not a chatbot, it's a conversational agent, or, it's a virtual agent, just different ways of renaming it. Our system is very much built on the handover to the human and having a hybrid experience. I think, and this is perception, I haven't really tested your product, but I think Wade and Wendy comes from a deep tech expertise you have PhDs who work in your company. And so you're building intelligence that works without the human intervention, perhaps.
Yeah. So the notion of human intervention is a really interesting one. So let me lay out for you a little bit of how we approach this problem, right? And where we started from. And, we started from a place of recruiting and recruiting that we saw our CEO and founder, while, his previous ventures were deep tech, wearables for like manufacturing and farming, deep marketing tech in the early days of that industry. His first job out of college was as a recruiter. And he felt that pain of, I love the problem. And everyone at our organization, to a T, it's something that we screen for in our hiring process, is really excited about solving the hiring problem, which is getting people the right opportunity as fast as humanly possible. And that experience kind of is what bubbled this up. And there's so much wasted space when it comes to the recruiting process. So much time spent looking up email addresses and a dozen tools, and spending all your time on LinkedIn, crafting the perfect email, having the same 15-minute conversation over and over again, only to find out that the candidate actually moved 2 years ago and they're not really, they're not open to working in your location. All this kinds of running in place. And you're never sure, when you're a human recruiter connecting with a candidate, if this is the right fit. And as a candidate, you're not sure, is it worth my time to even connect with this recruiter? And you have this kind of core problem in place that we wanted to take that kind of deep tech and automation approach to, which was, we want to clear out all of the rote recruiting tasks that get in the way of humans coming together. So when you say human intervention, our goal is to have as little human intervention in the chat experience itself. Right. So, in terms of kind of what we do, our platform helps automate for an enterprise company, helps automate 3 core functions. Sourcing, so identifying a candidate for a role, engaging them in an informational interview, getting them excited about the opportunity, a few basic qualifying questions, and if they're a fit, kind of bringing them into the hiring process. Screening. So somebody applies to a job, they go through a first round deep dive interview with our bot, all kind of written text. And the last is coordination. So scheduling, messaging, don't forget your interview is tomorrow at 1 p.m., that kind of work.
Yeah.
Our goal is to do all that so recruiters can come in and see, okay, this candidate is excited. They check off all the boxes. Here's the AI recommendation that is leading to me to believe they're a fit. And I'm sure that this candidate is worth my time. Now let me as a recruiter build a relationship, guide them through the hiring process, and help get them across the finish line. We do believe that ultimately recruiting is still always going to boil down to human decision-making process. On the other side of the equation, we have a candidate-facing bot. So Wendy works at the enterprise, and Wade we put out into the world as a kind of an AI career guide. And you chat with Wade about, what you've done in the past, what you'd like to do. There are personality tests, so you can get a real sense of who you like to work with, how you like to work, why you work. Is it a matter of, I just want to grow my career in whatever way possible. I want to maximize my salary because I want to be able to take.
Wait, is that Wendy or Wade?
This is Wade.
Wade, because it sounds like I would actually open up more to a Wendy than I would to a Wade, but fine.
So this is one of the things, and I'm going to ask you a question, which I hope is not too uncouth because I'm on your show. One of the things that we saw from the beginning, which we were not ready for, was there's something about when you're chatting with an AI personality, and I know for you and for us, that's key to the experience, is letting people know, hey, this is not an automated personality. There is a level of trust. People don't feel judged. And not everyone wants to open up to a bot necessarily, but we had, in our early days, we had candidates sharing stories that recruiters, that have been doing it for 20 years had never heard. People surviving, terrorist attacks, people going into depth about personal tragedy that they had overcome and how it related to the job that they were applying for, and these really deeply personal stories. And when we would conduct, surveys and user interviews afterwards, there's this theme of, I wasn't sure about this, but once I started talking, I realized, what, I can just tell my story and I can get out of the way. And there's no judgment. And, work is such a personal, specific context, right? And I would love to hear from your side of the table, like, what do you see when people are interacting with TalkPush? Like, how do they feel about it?
Well, first, to your point, I think it's a good medium for getting stuff out that would be sensitive. So an exit interview would be a good medium to use chatbots because, you're talking to an AI, and so you can say things as they are a little bit more, perhaps, than if you're talking to HR, because HR can hold back your salary, but the AI is not going to hold back your salary, hopefully. And on the matter of people opening up, we do, very, very large volumes, and most of it you were organizing in sourcing, screening, and coordinating. Really, we try to keep the sourcing bit, which is like ask questions direct to the job, as lean as possible. And then screening is also quite lean, and it's the bulk of the volume. And we collect answers that are text, but also audio and video. So audio and video is the chance for people to express their creativity, and we see some nice things there, of course. On text, it's usually a little bit faster because people on their mobile phones, and they're not going to go on forever. So yeah, that's how I would describe it. But there are different pools of population because we work in 8 or 10 countries that have different reactions. So some markets, the people are more warm, and they try to convince the bots to, treat them nice and put them at the top of the list. And they use more flowery language, I'll say.
Sure. Yeah, I'll never forget the first time we had, so the Wendy, the chatbot personality that is doing the interviewing, basically, she's the recruiter. And we had somebody go through an interview, and at the end, we have a little wave emoji, and Wendy says, like, thank you so much. Like the hiring, the human hiring team will get back to you, something like that, something from the early days, whatever it said. And people were responding, thanks, Wendy. Hope you have a great day. And people know Wendy's a robot. We had like robot jokes in some of the early chats, like people knew, but there's that notion of, well, if I'm going to chat with it, I'm going to treat it like a, like it's a thing. Like I'm going to call it by its name. It's Wendy.
No, we get the same thing. I mean, it got to the point of it's like, I really hope that you're going to get back to me sooner because I really need this job because blah, blah, blah. My daughter needs a surgery or something.
Oh my goodness. Wow. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
At the end of the application process, which, makes your heart bleed, of course.
Yeah.
But my heart's not, the butt doesn't have a heart. So the butt's like, okay.
Yeah. Sorry, there's nothing in our evaluation algorithm about, the touching story, unfortunately.
Personal circumstances.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's switch gears a little bit. And maybe it sounds like, we should have a separate podcast where we put our bot people with your bot people and share bot stories. That would be fun. Oh, but it would be for a different kind of audience. My audience is mostly TA professionals and they could get a little bit bored. So, one thing that we kind of started at the same time, right? When did you launch Wade and Wendy?
So Wade and Wendy started in, like on the couch, like dollar and a dream, an idea in 2015. And and we've been building ever since.
Yeah, so around the same time. I may be a few months older, but we only did our first text bot in 2016 after our initial run was doing IVR voice collection over the phone.
Oh, awesome.
And sometimes people ask me, are you still a startup? 5 years in? And I don't know what to tell them because, the company's more mature 5 years in, but people want to work in a startup because it's cool and exciting. How do we keep it cool and exciting 5 years in when we haven't yet taken over the world? Certainly our numbers are very high and it's, we have purpose around that. But what are your thoughts on how to keep it fresh? And I'm also curious, to extend a little bit the conversation on the retention. Is there a retention number which is too high?
Oh, interesting.
Because I think the company from 5 years ago, 4 years ago, did not need the same people as it does now.
Yep. So that's what a question. I'll work backwards. I'll answer that first because I think that will help inform sort of the how do you keep it fresh. I think I completely agree with your point, which is that, at every stage of company, you need different types of personality. The reality on the ground is really different. When we were tackling an incredibly difficult idea in an immature tech space and market, in 2015, 2016, really up until probably like early 2019, it was when we would talk to prospective clients, we had to explain what a chatbot was, what AI was, why HR was going to benefit from AI and what that even meant. When it came to the problems that we were solving and just the ability to manage a chat conversation and what that took and understanding from a design and conversation perspective through the hard tech of, how do you build for the future with this? It was so much open field, just an empty meadow with grass in every direction and you just have to walk forward, right? And that is not for everybody. That level of uncertainty, of rapid rate of change, of chaos to a degree, because I'll never forget when we went live with the first customer, because I'd been on a 0 to 1 startup journey before, so I had a distinct memory then of what happened and how disruptive and special having a client was to an organization that was under the hood trying to solve these deep tech problems, certainly user testing all the time, but it's so different when you're actually live. So, the person that is engaged and excited with that chaos, and certainly we do have a chunk of our core team that has been with us from those early days. When you get to a level of, okay, this is a thing, and there's still so much green grass and there's still so much to do, but there is a clear pathway. And the people that we have now, there are people that I think if they had joined the organization 4 or 5 years ago would have been miserable. They don't, being the fifth person on a team trying to solve this is a really different lived experience than, being employee 12 or 15 or 20 or whatever it is. And that changes as you
some people would be addicted to startup after startup after startup. And you see those resumes where people spend 6 to 12 months and, you're thinking, okay, either this person has serious ADD and is not reliable, or perhaps that's just the way they're geared. They just have to go at the early stage and keep doing that over and over again.
I have this notion that we talk about a lot, which is startup time. And the earlier you are at a startup, both in terms of like company size and like development lifecycle, if it's a tech startup, those early days, every month you should count as 6 months. So, 6 months at an early stage startup when it's 5 people feels like 3 years of sort of life experience. And as the company grows, as things become more predictable, that starts to flatten out. We're like, okay, 5 years at, late stage tech company is 5 years. Yeah. But if you're part of that first year, there's so much emotion and complexity and raw hours that go into those early days that it's almost as if you're operating on a different calendar. And certainly there are people, that were on our journey for 6 months. And, we have a couple of those, especially some junior folks that were interns and things like that. And, to this day, we have relationships as if we'd worked together for a decade, just because those 6 months really forged that time. And it was a really notable kind of moment for all of us.
And so your alumni, your best alumni, did they stay in the startup world for the most part? They moved on to their own thing?
It depends. And we've watched people go to a giant company and then realize like we've been at it for long enough where a couple of people know on the second thing afterwards, and worked for, a Fortune 50 company for a couple of years. And we're like, no, I miss that. So most went on to startups in some capacity, but a handful went to the big places where everybody else goes. And,
you gotta pay the bill.
You gotta, what motivates you is different for everybody. And if it's an awesome paycheck, which you can really get at a giant company, then, by all means, go after it.
I think so, right? I was saying conversational designers will find job, and you can go work for Microsoft anytime and probably get something there. Well, other tips on that I can appropriate on how to keep the excitement strong, especially in these troubled time when we cannot see each other in person?
So this is advice that I got. Hopefully you can use, both you, Max, and you, the listener at home or wherever you're listening to this. When one of the things that the entire employee life cycle is tied together, right? So from the first time you hear about a company that you might work for in the recruiting process to, 20 years down the line when you're an AVP and just continuing to kind of move up the ranks, whatever it might be. But the best organizations that I've seen really do illuminate their entire process with that organization's mission, right? And, I think about, companies where I've gotten to see this up close are organizations like, and I'm not, some of these are clients, some of these are just companies where I've gotten the chance to talk to leaders and hear what they have to say. But I think about companies like PepsiCo or Comcast that have a real kind of message infused in what being an employee there means and what the goals of that organization mean to kind of the broader world. And
wait a minute, Dave. PepsiCo is the mission sell more sugar?
So it's fascinating. PepsiCo has a wide ranging, and I have no affiliation with PepsiCo. So I've just heard people at PepsiCo speak about their culture. So PepsiCo's internal mission is really oriented around diversity and personal development. So yes, they are selling corn chips and sugary drinks and a whole bunch of other things, which is, these are complexities in the modern world. But internally, in terms of their company culture and what they do, they are deeply engaged with bringing their workforce into the community service projects. They are one of the most diverse leadership organizations. The fact that I even know this stuff just tells you how, and again, I have no connection to Pepsi whatsoever. The way that they communicate that brand, the way it filters out throughout the organization keeps people, not just engaged and motivated in a kind of transactional way, but in a deep way. People are committed to the development of the organization. Now, selling sugary drinks isn't necessarily what drives me every day. But for us, we're lucky, and I'm sure you feel the same way. We're oriented towards this really powerful problem, right? Every day I get to come to work and I get to work on chipping away at the massive unemployment crisis that is affecting, hundreds of millions of people across the globe. I get to work on issues of representation and diversity by trying to remove bias in the hiring process. I mean, if you're a recruiter, if you're a TA person, and you're thinking about your team is on the front lines of some of the most important decision-making that human beings make, where they choose to work, where they choose to spend their time.
It affects society.
It's such a important thing. And, we do a lot to remember that and to talk about that. We have like an internal mantra that we call 60 to 6, which is today, the average job search in America, and it's different the world over, but the majority of our team's based in the US. So this is the number we use. The average job search takes 6 days. So when you're looking for work, whether you're unemployed or you've decided it's time for a change, the average job search takes 60 days. We want to create a world where it takes 6. We want to make hiring 10 times faster, where you're not spending all your time searching and trying to eliminate the right and wrong job, where the right job comes to you and you are able to just opt in. For the recruiter, they don't have to spend all this time searching for candidates and putting people through the process. You just get the right candidate. They're the right candidate because you have all this data to suggest they're the right candidate and how it maps on to their future work at your organization. And this notion of 60 to 6 and removing 54 days of not knowing how you're going to pay your bills, not knowing what you're going to be doing with yourself, just going crazy, sitting by yourself. Like that is so powerful and illuminating. And, I think that really helps keep things fresh. And, from a startup, and this is a little more specific to a startup context, you keep hitting milestones along the way, right? You're never done. It's never like, okay, like this is over. We got this contract, or we're able to release this functionality, or this thing that we've been talking about for 5 years since this was an idea on the couch is now about to go live because of the work of dozens of people across the globe. That is so cool. And when you get to celebrate those kinds of victories, it's just a reminder of why you get up and do all the unglamorous things that being at a startup requires. Because it's not, I'm probably making it sound all, sunshine and lollipops, but it's a lot. And there's a lot of work that a big team and money can solve, that you have to be scrappy and you have to find your clever way around it and just put in the time.
Yeah, I think we're lucky, or maybe not lucky. We picked the industry we chose to go after. And that was one of the reasons. I would personally not be motivated to sell sugary drinks, but I'm going to use what you said about PepsiCo and go chase some sponsorship money from Mountain Dew for this podcast.
Awesome. Yeah.
See if we can get some.
A really extreme podcast. Yeah.
Yeah. Great. Well, we could go on all day on these topics. And maybe we'll talk again, and maybe we'll have our bot people have a separate chat. But it was a real pleasure, real treat having you on the show, Dave. Thank you so much for sharing, and all the best to you and your 60 to 6 mission. I'll see if I can tweak it and personalize it for my team.
I would love that. Look, this is one of the things that we talk a lot about is that this is a community, right? And, if you're solving these problems are bigger than like any group, any company, things like that. And it's always exciting to talk to other people that care about these issues. So thank you so much for having me. I am excited to get to talk with you about this in this setting. And yeah, hopefully people are ready to chat with the bot about work now.
All right. Awesome. Thanks, Dave.
Thanks, Max.
I had such a great time interviewing Dave Mekelburg, Chief of Staff, Head of People at Wade and Wendy. It's often an experience running a startup which is very competitive, where you're trying to grab the headlines and grab market share from your competition. And it's so refreshing and so nice to meet the competition and remember that you are working on problems that are much bigger than your own and much bigger than your own company. And then we had so much to learn from each other. So thanks, Dave, for participating. I hope you enjoyed our conversation and it didn't get too geeky for you, that you'll sign up for more on the Recruitment Hackers Podcast.